Hi there! If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children, so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. If you're tuning in, it probably means you're navigating the beautiful and sometimes tricky world of parenthood with a partner on your side. And today, we're tackling a big topic that many new parents will face, and that is intimacy. Specifically, how to feel close with our partners even when physical connection takes the back seat after having a baby or several children. Now, let's be honest here. Becoming parents can shift your relationship in ways that are completely unexpected. And, weirdly enough, this is to be expected. Before the baby arrived, intimacy probably felt a little bit more natural. Physical connection, date nights, spontaneous affection, it all came easier. But after a baby or after children are in the mix, well, it's a different story. There's exhaustion and the endless responsibilities and the focus on this new life or the focus on the children who are, usually always around. It can make intimacy feel like a distant memory. And sometimes this shift can be misinterpreted as rejection or lack of interest, which can also then lead to frustration and resentment on both sides. So today, we're going to explore why intimacy changes in those early days, how to adapt without feeling hurt or misunderstood, and the small but practical steps you can take to start building closeness again. And here's something to remember before we begin. The absence of physical intimacy right now doesn't mean something is wrong with the relationship or that it's anyone's fault. It's simply part of the adjustment phase. And it's important to note this, and it's important that before we get started with this episode, that I make this statement, because a lot of times we give meaning to something that doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. That is part of the process. And yes, of course, we don't want it to be permanent, because then it could develop into something that is harmful to the relationship. But if from the beginning we give meaning to the loss of intimacy, or at the very least, the decrease of moments of intimacy with our partner, if we start to see it as something abnormal, as something that only couples with problems have to face, then we make it way bigger in our heads and in our minds and in our hearts, so that it then creates distance and resentment and all of these other things. So that's why I want to point out that it's part of the process that intimacy will take a hit for most couples after parenthood. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. That doesn't mean that the care isn't there. And it doesn't mean that we can't gain it back. We do, however, have to make a little bit of a conscious effort, something that has been vilified as well. So because intimacy did come easier and more naturally before children, we believe that the fact that we have to put conscious effort in the now means that we no longer want it, really. And so what does that mean if I think about that about my partner? Oh, I have to make an effort to be intimate with them, and they have to think about it, and we have to kind of, schedule it, and we have to consider this or go to an expert to talk about this. Well, this automatically means we don't care about each other anymore. We're not attracted to each other as much anymore. So the game is lost. No, that's not the case. The circumstances are different now. And the years have passed, and there are several other things that get in the way of intimacy being as natural and as spontaneous maybe as it used to be. If we don't make that mean that the attraction is no longer there, that the interest is no longer there, then we can truly begin to reconnect and to find intimacy again in our relationship. So in this episode, we'll walk through a few stages of rebuilding intimacy, the ways that we can foster emotional closeness, and how to better understand each other's needs as you both settle into this role of parenthood, whether you're new parents right now or whether you have been parents for a while, but parenthood has taken the wheel and you feel like all your other parts have been in the back seat and there needs to be a bit of a balancing act there. So while this episode may speak more so to couples who have just had a new baby for the first time, this is still for you if you feel like intimacy is still an issue even after several years, even after several babies, even after your children are now in the toddlerhood stage or even further than that, but you still feel that intimacy has not been restored and that your parenthood role, your motherhood role, your fatherhood role is so prevalent that it doesn't allow for the other parts of you to have a say, to have a little bit of breathing room in order to take care of your other needs besides the need to be a good parent and love your children and take care of them and keep them safe. So, if you're ready, let's get into this. All right, so let's dive into why intimacy can feel so different after children. Like I said before, this is actually to be expected. But why? You may still be wondering, why is this expected? Why should this be happening? Well, becoming a parent is one of the most transformative experiences that we go through. I've said this a lot of times. When children come along, everything changes. Your daily routines and your responsibilities and your sleep, the lack of it really, and even your sense of self, these all start to shift. Suddenly, your roles expand, and so do the demands on your time, your energy, and the attention that you can give to anything outside of parenthood. Naturally, at the beginning, the focus shifts to the baby, who needs so much time and care in the early days. And then, if we don't start working through all of these things that change, if we don't make an effort to reconnect with ourselves, if we don't understand deeply the process of matrescence and how it's affecting us and allow ourselves to process all of this, to reconcile the old identity with the new, to bring forward all our parts who, yes, are very much willing to take the back seat for a while, but then they also need to be heard, to be seen. Parenthood can take over, our parenthood identity can take over and affect intimacy as a result for a way longer time than those early days of baby. And that's why I said in the beginning, this is not just for new parents who are having their firstborn. I could be speaking right now to you, and you may have 3 children above toddlerhood and still feel that your intimacy hasn't ever bounced back. I'm saying this with conviction because I do have couples that I see that never restored their intimacy quite as much, and they have children that are above 10, 11, 12 years old. And that's not because they don't care about their partner or that they don't want to be close to their partner. It's because if we don't tend to our other parts, if we don't understand that this is a normal shift that's happening, if we don't give ourselves time to reconcile our old self with our new self, then we also don't give time to us as a couple to understand how the dynamic changes between us after children are in the mix. And so the first thing that is affected by all of this, by this lack of awareness and this lack of time and space and compassion for ourselves to notice and work through this shift that we're going through, to make it normal and to make it okay and to actually make it something beautiful. The first thing that will take a hit because of all of this is intimacy. And it's the last thing that we'll start to see improvement after we do start working on all of this, after we do go to ask for support, or after we do start listening to our needs a little bit better. And we may expect that, okay, so we're doing a little bit better as a couple, we are doing the work, but the intimacy is still not there. Why? Well, intimacy is usually, not always, but usually the area which will see improvement last, because it involves trusting, it involves letting go, and it involves being open, both metaphorically and literally for us women, right? So it's really important to understand that if you feel quite disconnected in the realm of intimacy with your partner, You may start doing the work and you both may have very good intentions, but it could take time. And that too doesn't mean that you're failing. And that too doesn't have to have an assigned meaning to it. It doesn't mean that the game is lost because you're not seeing improvement very quickly. So as our roles start to expand, and let's be real, other than attention and other than the sleeplessness and the lack of energy, there's also usually way less time to be able to be intimate with your partner. And it will take a little bit more planning because now it has to be a time where the children aren't home, for example, or the baby is asleep. So when the logistics come into play, it quite literally creates an obstacle to something that in the past didn't take much planning at all. Now, here is where it can all get very tricky. Often, this new dynamic will be misinterpreted as rejection. It can feel like your partner is no longer interested or that something is really wrong with the two of you, with your marriage, with your relationship. But here's the truth. This lack of intimacy isn't about rejection or lack of love. It's about the realities of adjusting to a whole new life. One that includes a little person or a few little persons who demand a lot of time and energy. And when we misinterpret that distance that is naturally created by the fact that there are more people in the mix, you're not just the two of you anymore, resentment can and will start to creep in. We might start to wonder, why aren't things the way that they used to be? Or why isn't our partner showing up the way that we had hoped? But the absence of physical intimacy during this time doesn't mean anyone is doing anything wrong. I am repeating it on purpose. I want to make sure that this seeps in before we get to the practical things, because this all just means that things will look a little different for a while, and that's okay. And the only reason why couples will find this loss of intimacy to drag on is very well because they believe that this is not normal and because they assign it meaning, and that is why it drags on. This stage is supposed to be temporary. And while it can feel very discouraging, the goal isn't to try to get everything back to how it was before. No getting back to normal. If you've been listening for a while, you know that this is a phrase that irks me so much. Instead, it's about understanding why things feel different and looking for small ways to feel connected within this new reality, the new normal that is being set up. Once we recognize that the changes in intimacy aren't about rejection, it takes some of the sting out of it, and it helps us focus on what we can do to rebuild closeness in other ways. So now that we've taken that out of the way, we talked about why intimacy often changes after a baby arrives, and we took care of the misconceptions, and I hope that I've drilled it in your mind that there's nothing wrong with you guys. Let's explore the stages of rebuilding this closeness. This is less about jumping straight into physical intimacy and more about building a foundation of emotional connection that can gradually bring back physical closeness in a way that feels more natural, which is what both of you are going for. So think of it as a gentle process of reconnecting, one small step at a time. The first stage in rebuilding intimacy is empathy. Really taking a moment to understand what your partner might be going through and accepting that it's okay if their experience doesn't match yours exactly. For instance, if one of you is deeply exhausted and overwhelmed, it might be harder to show up physically or even emotionally in the same way that you used to. If, on the other hand, you're the one that's feeling a bit neglected, I invite you to try to consider what your partner is juggling right now, and vice versa. If they are feeling disconnected, taking a time to see things from their perspective can soften any resentment that may have started to build up. A helpful approach here is to ask yourself, what could it be that my partner is going through that's making intimacy difficult for them right now? This question isn't about making excuses. It's about creating a space where you both feel seen and understood. Because if you are creating an excuse, you're also creating an obstacle. The point here isn't for you to start making assumptions about why your partner isn't feeling intimate. It's to begin by trying to get into their shoes and then when you have an open conversation about this, meaning it doesn't stay in your head as an excuse with the underlying hope that this will soon get fixed and settled, which then creates frustration and urgency and an expectation that it should change. And if it's not changing, then it creates anger and resentment. This is the beginning stage where you start to think about how could my partner be feeling, which then if you empathize, you are able to approach the very, very necessary conversation about this from a place of understanding, from a place of curiosity, and not a place of judgment. This can make or break the conversation, really. So I'm hoping that you are seeing the difference. If you show up to a conversation about intimacy and how much you would hope that it can improve, and in your head, you're thinking, this isn't normal. My partner doesn't love me. We should have been better by now. They are not willing to fulfill my needs. Now, by default, you're entering the conversation from a very negative space, and it's very easy for your tone to be different than what you would have wanted, and maybe you're minding your words, but your tone and your facial expressions and your bodily stance will show that you're coming from a place of annoyance and demand. I'm willing to bet that your words aren't as good as you may think they are as well, but let's just suppose that you're really good with words, that you've thought out the script you want to say, and you're really good at staying on point. Everything else, and especially your reaction, your comebacks, your answers to what your partner may present you with, are not going to be as eloquent as you may want. And much more importantly, it's not about eloquence, but they are going to be telling of how you're really feeling and the blame that you're shifting onto your partner. Instead, when you show up knowing that this is quite normal, and even if it's dragged on for a while, if you show up with an understanding that your partner is potentially very exhausted, is very much in the motherhood or the fatherhood role for such a long time in the day that it's very hard to switch, when you may have put yourself in their shoes, your assumptions may not be correct necessarily, and I don't want you to take it as that, because here's another trap that we can get into. When we try to empathize with someone, we may be assuming that there are certain factors that are creating this situation for us. When we assume these factors, we could either be taking things personally, like I said before, or we could be trying to empathize by finding quote unquote excuses. When we try to find excuses, sometimes we take ourselves out of the equation, and we may be really blindsided and then react very badly if the conversation brings up something that we may have not considered that could be our responsibility. When our part in the whole issue, let's call it, comes along, then we may feel like, oh, and I tried to excuse you, I tried to empathize with you, and you're blaming it all on me. So empathize compassionately, knowing that what you are thinking are the reasons may not be exactly the case, but that what you're doing is you're putting yourself in your partner's shoes so that when you do have a conversation about this, you are having it from a place of, I am here with you and for you. I know you're well-intentioned. And even if I have a part in this, which of course we all have a part, when intimacy is not at its best, both partners have some kind of part in this, then I can hear you out because I'm also very curious about your experience. I'm coming from a place of curiosity and really being open because A, I'm not assuming that there's something wrong with us. B, I'm not assuming that you are throwing all the blame on me. And C, I haven't made assumptions or excuses that have blocked my brain from being able to register any other reasons why this is happening. Therefore, I'm coming in open-minded and willing to understand and hear you out when your narrative is different than mine in regards to why we are having intimacy issues. So you can see that sometimes just this awareness can take the pressure off and help you both feel closer. Now, once you've taken the step back to understand each other's experience, it's time, as stage 2, to focus on small, intentional acts of connection. When physical intimacy is limited, emotional connection becomes even more important. Usually, intimacy is limited because emotional connection has also taken a hit. And it doesn't have to get complicated here. We don't have to overanalyze this. Often, it's the little things that will make a big difference. Here's a few simple ideas. Share a morning coffee or a tea together. Even 5 minutes or 10 minutes of sitting together without interruptions can be a reminder that you guys are still a team. Another tip would be to leave a kind note or send a quick text. Something as small as, "I'm thinking of you," or "I appreciate everything you're doing," goes a long way in keeping each other feeling seen. And another idea could be to do a daily check-in. We've talked about this before. You can do this before bed or whenever you get a quiet moment. You can ask each other how the day went or how you're both feeling. It's less about solving problems and more about staying connected and just truly listening. These small gestures might seem very minor, I know, but they help reinforce that you're still there for each other. And they're a great starting point so that there's not a lot of pressure and so that you don't turn and say, "Markella did make suggestions for me on the podcast and they were so complicated that I couldn't even get them started." Okay? No excuses. Even if you're both feeling stretched thin, these are small things that you can try. Pick one, just one, and give it a shot. This one thing will be your little anchor that keeps you both feeling valued, and over time, they create a foundation that makes rebuilding intimacy much easier. We will be building on this foundation, so as minor as this may seem, it's actually extremely important. Finally, stage 3. As you're reconnecting emotionally, physical intimacy will often start to feel more natural as well. This doesn't mean jumping back into things the way they were before. It's about finding ways to be physically close without having that pressure. So this stage might look like holding hands or giving a quick shoulder rub. Simple gestures that signal closeness without expectation. And this is very, very important for couples who haven't been physically close for a while. One partner is usually much more ready to just jump into intercourse. I'm trying to keep this clean. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use the other word. But one partner is usually ready. And while it could be that if both partners were ready, becoming physically intimate in that way could also lead to feeling more emotionally connected and into increasing overall intimacy, meaning emotional closeness as well. In most cases, physical intimacy, like I said before, comes last. When one partner is ready for more and is ready to take it to the last level, the other partner knows. If we haven't actually voiced it and said it explicitly, it's very obvious that one partner is much more ready and totally down for it, whereas the other partner feels like they're the ones that are holding back. And then they start to feel guilty and like they're the bad guy. And in this case, you will see that many times the partner that isn't ready, they feel that expectation so much that they will get triggered even by their partner touching their hand. It's not because this would have normally been an issue, but it's because of the underlying expectation that I'm supposed to allow this to happen. And I know that you want more. And this reminds me that I'm not ready. And it reminds me of all the things that I have in my head about why we're not well. And then I feel like you're not seeing or hearing me and that you only care about getting your needs met. And so I start to feel that you're disregarding all the things that are getting in the way of me feeling as ready to be intimate. And so this is all going on in his or her head. And then they'll lash out and you'll be wondering, I just touched her hand, his hand. Why are they acting like this? Well, it's all of that playing in their head. And we could say that, okay, well, they're being very analytical and they are making a much bigger thing out of something. And just because I want to go there doesn't mean that I'm expecting or pushing and make it their problem. But the fact is that if this is happening, there's also a reason why it's been drilled into their head that there is an expectation that is so urgent and is creating such pressure for them. So it's important for you to consider what are signals that you've been sending or things that you've been saying that have created this interpretation in your partner's head that this is all you're looking for. It may not be the case, and maybe you were more pushy with your expectation before, but you aren't now and you feel like this isn't fair. But obviously, even if you have taken steps to relieve the tension, it's still there. And there's been steps that have been skipped and things we assume should have been forgiven and let go of without realizing that our partner may need more time, may need more reassurances, or maybe reading other things in the way we express ourselves or in the things that we do or in our body language that is still sending the same message, even though we're saying the right things and even though we're not being very intense with our actions. So recapping this point, holding hands, giving a quick shoulder rub, but making sure that it is not done with expectation. And one way, when you are first, like at the very beginning of this, and if there is a lot of tension around this issue, the best way to make sure that it's received in this way, meaning without expectation, would be to ask for consent. I know it may feel silly and you may have been together for years and you may have children that have grown. You may be wondering, I really need to ask for consent to hold her hand? Is this what we do now? I understand that this could feel like you're taking a lot of steps backward. That if you start with asking for consent, it's as if you are starting over the relationship and that it will take ages until you guys feel as comfortable as you used to. You may feel resistance to what I'm saying right now. Like, oh my God, I'm not willing to go that far back. I'm not willing to feel like we've lost so much touch that we have to start like as if we're on the first date. I get it that it could feel like you're starting over, and this could be presenting you with feelings of frustration and even anger that you have to put all this effort. But trust me, if you start there, if you're willing to go there, the trust and the connection will be established way quicker. You are, in a way, starting from the beginning. And if you're feeling this way, you are valid to a degree, but I'm hoping that you can trust me when I say that this will just be you skipping through all the stages super quickly, because when your partner sees that you are willing to do this, they are going to let their guard down. You are showing them commitment. And you are showing them that you're respecting their time and their pace. And what happens when you show me that you're respecting my pace? I will feel showered by your compassion and I will let my guard down, even just a little, but I will start to let my guard down. I will feel that he or she is very, very interested in making this work, so much so that they're willing to start from the beginning as if this is a new relationship. Your partner will also realize that this is something that not many people would do, that this is very frustrating. And so just seeing you being willing to do this will allow your partner to understand just how interested you are in them feeling comfortable. And what does that create? A feeling of being comfortable. Another thing you could do is cuddling on the couch or lying next to each other. Again, this is low pressure. It's moments of physical touch that can be incredibly comforting, and they help rebuild a sense of connection. It can really, really, really go a long way. Cuddling, or even just touching hands if cuddling is too much. And also, you could be setting aside time for intentional affection. So this is a bit advanced, I would say, depending on what stage you're at. But if you're ready, you can consider setting 10 minutes aside to cuddle in bed, just to be close without any agenda. Maybe even set the parameter that it's not going to lead to intercourse. What this does is that it creates safety. This sends the message that I am respecting your time frame. And also, even if you tell me, you know what, I think I might be ready. If I say, as much as I really, really want to take you up on your offer right now, I think we shouldn't go there at this point. I think that if we're still willing tomorrow, let's intentionally set time to do this tomorrow and leave it open. That again shows that you are protective. And you could say that, I know that in the past I've created this expectation and I don't want any part of you to feel like you're being coerced. I want to do that when we haven't set the parameter that it's not on the agenda. Does that make sense? And you could say no. If it doesn't make sense, if you disagree, if you have some feedback for me, if it's confusing, please get in touch with me. I answer all the messages that I get. So the easiest way to get in touch with me would be to go to @markella.kaplani on Instagram. That's my Instagram handle. But you can always also find me on my email at info@markellakaplani.com. Basically, the key here is patience. Don't put pressure on yourself or your partner to quote unquote get back to normal. Physical intimacy will rise from emotional connection. And so what the point is here is to start to rebuild that trust and that bond and that closeness that you felt emotionally over time. And this will eventually lead to physical intimacy without you even knowing how you got there. Each of these stages is about gradually building a foundation of closeness. And by focusing on empathy, small acts of connection, and gentle physical affection, you're strengthening the relationship in a way that respects where each of you is at right now. Now that we've gone through these stages of rebuilding intimacy, I want to make sure that we also discuss something that can be challenging but is so important, which is communicating your needs. You knew it would come to this, right? I made sure to tell you that you want to empathize and be compassionate, but you don't want to keep that in your head, because if you don't communicate, what will happen? These assumptions will create expectations, which will lead to resentment. After children arrive, both of you may have new needs that weren't there before. And sometimes we expect our partner to just know what we're feeling or needing. We think, well, of course I would feel this way. And of course I would need this thing now. They're supposed to know. If they love me and they care about me, they would have put themselves in their shoes. But in reality, clear and gentle communication can go a long way in building closeness without adding any extra pressure. The key here is to share what you need in a way that doesn't come across as a demand. Think of it as an invitation, something that opens the door to connection rather than creating an expectation. For example, instead of saying, "We never have time together anymore," you can try something like, "I really miss the moments that we used to have just to ourselves. Do you think we can try carving out a little time together, even if it's just for a quick coffee in the morning before the kids get up, or just 5-10 minutes before you go to bed?" You want to make sure to understand that this could trigger a negative reaction. So if your partner is very sleepless, if you say, "Well, when the kids go to bed, let's spend time together," this is way too open. It doesn't tell me what you're expecting of me, what you're wanting and needing. And what it could trigger is, you don't get it. I am exhausted and I'm about to wake up another 3-4 times in the night, and you're telling me not to go immediately to bed? You don't get me. I need to scroll on social media for a little while so that I can get my head straight. And you're asking me to spend time with you? It's not that I don't care about you and I don't think this is important, but my brain is fried. And if your partner thinks that way, they're going to be negative to the idea. And if they're going to be negative, then you're going to feel rejected. And where does that lead us? Nowhere. Further apart, really, is where it leads us. So instead, it will make a difference to say the same exact thing, but put a time frame on it. What do you think of setting up 5-10 minutes after the kids go to bed? And maybe after you've showered and after you've had dinner? Whatever the case may be, however it works in your household, whatever it is that your partner may have asked you for, and it may be making them feel like they're a little bit more human after the kids have gone to bed. Give it a time frame. You can say, "I get it. You need your time to shower and your time to eat and your time to decompress by watching Netflix or scrolling social media, and you need to get to bed. So I don't think that we should be putting any of the two of us in this pressure, because I myself need these things. But what if we do 5 minutes for the first stage? As a first trial, what if we do 5 minutes? before they get up or after they go to bed or after we've done the things we need to do and before we go to bed. Whatever, something along those lines. That is much less pressure. And it also tells me you really get me, you see me, and you're setting a low expectation, which means you've been listening and you've been empathizing with me. So you may not be asking for something big at all, but when you leave it open, let's make sure that we connect with each other at the end of the day. You're saying it from a great intention and out of love and because you want to keep this relationship going. So when you get the response of, you just don't get it, do you? What is it that you want? Do I have to baby you? If you get something along those lines as a response, it can be very disappointing. You can feel very let down. And it's natural that you would feel like your partner doesn't care as much about connecting with you as you do. But that's not what's happening. There is a misinterpretation there that could be stemming from a million different things. So I'm not going to get into that right now, but there's a misinterpretation. And so it's important for you to be specific. This approach helps your partner see your need as something that's shared. That's not a criticism. Instead, you're presenting them with an invitation to connect. That shows that you're committed to keeping the relationship strong, even though you understand the challenges that are present in your current family dynamic and the challenges that she may be facing or he may be facing in the day-to-day. And so you may be wondering, how do we even begin such a conversation? Sometimes even thinking about beginning this conversation could be worrisome because you might be thinking, what if I trigger her? What if I trigger him? Well, here are a few examples of how you can frame your needs in a way that invites connection rather than sounding like a demand or a criticism. I know we're both tired, but I've been missing the small things we used to do together. How would you feel about attempting to bring one or two or a few of them back? And how could it be done in a way that doesn't add any pressure? Or, I'd love for us to make time to check in with each other, even if it's just for a few minutes each day. How does that sound? Is it at all possible? Would you like that? I know things are different now, but I still want us to have those moments where we feel like a team. Maybe we can start with something small. What do you say? By keeping the focus on shared connection rather than personal frustration. I miss you. I need time with you. I used to have more of your attention and your care, and now I don't. Those are examples of things that we don't realize, but they come out. You're inviting your partner to join you in finding a way to stay close. And something that you could do is share this episode with your partner, have them listen to it, have them become an active member of this process of rebuilding connection with one another. But going back to these conversation starters, you can see that they're not confrontational. They're simply openings to talk about what's important to each of you. And here's the other side of the coin. When your partner shares their needs, it's important that you also approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. You can ask open-ended questions like, what would help you feel more supported right now? Or, is there anything that you need from me that would make things easier? This goes both ways, of course. When you create a safe space for each other to share what you need, it strengthens the bond between you and makes each of you feel that you're being heard and that you're valued. What my ultimate goal here is to ensure that you guys aren't just having conversations in order to be solving problems, because this starts to set the tone. And then you are going to inevitably create an association that whenever we are discussing things, we're discussing problems. And so the minute that one of you says, we need to talk, of course, you're going to feel like this is going to end badly. Whenever a conversation starts that isn't just something very quick of, getting some logistic thing done, anything that represents any form of communication will trigger an internal mechanism, a subconscious mechanism of, oh my gosh, we're going to argue again. We're going to be focusing on problems again. So it's important that you start conversations in a way that is open and allows for the person to share their views and their needs and how they feel about things and give their own suggestions as well, even though you may have thought out of a few that you find more fitting. And then this way, each of you feels truly seen in the relationship, and you make sure that you don't create this association, or that if it has been created, which in many cases in the couples that I see, it's already been created, you start to break this association. Clear, gentle communication is the bridge between feeling distant and feeling connected. By opening up about your needs in a way that's inviting and compassionate, you're also building a pathway to bring back closeness, even if physical intimacy isn't fully back just yet. All right, so as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a bit of encouragement. If you're feeling like intimacy has taken a back seat, or that things are just, different, know that it's normal. The transition into parenthood changes so much, and intimacy is one of those things that can look quite different for quite a while. But that doesn't mean closeness is gone or that it won't come back. Rebuilding intimacy isn't about going back to how things were before, but it's about creating a new kind of connection that works within this new chapter of your life. These small acts of empathy that we talked about, and the gentle communication and tiny habits of checking in with each other, these are what can build a foundation of closeness that grows over time. Finally, I don't think I've said it explicitly, but I do want to say that when we talk about intimacy, we aren't just talking about physical closeness, and we're definitely not just talking about intercourse. It's about feeling connected and seen and valued by each other. That is also intimacy, and that is the first step before we can get to other forms of intimacy. Just because physical intimacy might be less frequent right now than it used to be and less natural and spontaneous, it doesn't mean that the relationship is any less meaningful. Every little gesture that you make to stay connected, whether it's a kind word or a shared coffee or the quick cuddle, it adds to that sense of closeness. Parenthood brings new layers to your relationship, and while it may take time to fully feel that physical connection again, remember that intimacy is a journey, and that those layers can actually bring you guys closer if you decide to make them your power rather than an obstacle. By showing up for each other in small, consistent ways, you're building a relationship that can handle the ups and downs, a relationship that's built on real connection, not just habit, a relationship that has withstood change and has withstood the bumps in the road. So if you're up for it, here's a small challenge for the week. Try one new habit that brings a bit of closeness into your day. Maybe it's that quick check-in, or a compliment, or a moment just to sit together, even for a few minutes, and even if you're not necessarily talking. Whatever it is, make it something that feels simple but intentional. Most times, it's these small acts that make the biggest difference in how connected we feel with one another. And as you keep practicing, they'll become part of your rhythm as a couple, a foundation of intimacy that grows stronger as time goes on. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode gave you some reassurance and practical ideas for reconnecting with your partner. Remember that you guys are both in this together, and that every effort, as small as it may seem, will be a step toward a deeper and more connected relationship. If you found this episode helpful, I'm inviting you to share it with your partner, but also with anyone who might benefit from it. And if you really want to support this podcast and you're wondering how, leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. That way, more listeners can come in, more people can be helped, and I can fulfill my goal of creating more connection with ourselves, with our partners, and with our children and our dreams. As always, I'm here to support you, so feel free to reach out with any topics that you'd like me to dive into, or any feedback and questions you may have on Instagram at markella.kaplani, or by email at info@markellakaplani.com. Take care, keep showing up for each other, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye-bye.